Let's do that hockey.
You're listening to DobberProspects Radio. This is episode 133. I'm your host, Peter Harling. Thanks for listening, everybody. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about potential Shane Wright trade scenarios. So Shane Wright went fourth overall in the NHL draft, when a lot of people surprised that he didn't go first. He has started the NHL season in Seattle, who selected him fourth overall, but it's been a bit of a rough ride for him so far. He's barely played. When he does play, he's limited to about 6 minutes a night. So there's been a lot of talk about whether or not Shane Wright should stay in the NHL this year. The American Hockey League's not an option, so the other choice would be to return him to his junior team, which is the Kingston Frontenacs. So there's been a lot of debate about what would be the right thing, and I think that because he missed an entire season and didn't play during the pandemic when the OHL was shut down, that he needs to play. He needs reps. He needs minutes. And staying with the Seattle Kraken and being a healthy scratch isn't all bad. And there's lots you can learn by practicing with an NHL team and watching with NHL players and coaches. But when he does play, he needs more than 6 minutes. So there's a really good chance that they keep his games played down low, and that the plan would be to loan him out to Team Canada for the World Juniors, and then at that point make the decision about whether or not you're going to return him to the NHL after the World Juniors and let him play minutes with the Kraken, or do you send him back to junior and just allow him to dominate junior? Because he didn't really do that in his draft year. I mean, he was very good, but I wouldn't say he was a dominant player, and that probably has a lot to do with why he fell in the draft out of the first overall consensus seed, is that he just didn't rock it like a lot of people thought he would, and that a lot of first overall prospects kind of need to do. So, working on the assumption that the Seattle Kraken will return him to junior, the Kingston Frontenacs still own his OHL rights, and while the Frontenacs were a contending team in his draft year last year, they graduated a tremendous amount of their talent. Lucas Edmonds, Jordan Frasca, Martin Chromiak, and Zaid Wisdom have all graduated and moved on, kind of leaving the Frontenacs with a younger team, kind of looking at a rebuild. And a few weeks ago on Hockey Night in Canada, Jeff Merrick made a very interesting announcement that the OHL will be hosting the Memorial Cup in the year 2024, and 3 teams so far met the deadline to express their intent to bid on hosting rights for the Memorial Cup. And the Kingston Frontenacs were one of those teams. So, assuming that Shane Wright is returned to play out the balance of this season, it seems like a foregone conclusion that the Kingston Frontenacs would trade his rights to a contending team, probably at the behest of Seattle, and in their own best interest as well, so that it improves their chances of meeting some of the criteria for hosting the Memorial Cup. For more on the Memorial Cup in-depth analysis at each team's strength of bid, I did a post on DobberProspects recently, the OHL review, and that's something that I talked about, where I looked at Niagara, Sault Ste. Marie, and Kingston Frontenacs, what they bring to the table in terms of a bid. Now, obviously, I can't speak to their financial guarantee for revenue generated from this tournament, but I did talk about what their facilities' seating capacity offers, what challenges those facilities have, because that's a real consideration for hosting. You have to have a decent enough rink, and the league likes to have a dressing room for each team for the duration of the tournament, so that they don't have to move in and out for each game that they play every other day. Cities hosting accommodations like hotels, I don't really think that's an issue with these 3. And then, of course, hockey operations, or how competitive the team plans to be. So none of these teams are very competitive right now, but a trade with Shane Wright involved coming out of Kingston would certainly secure the Frontenacs some very good assets in return that would help bolster their bid for Memorial Cup by having a more competitive team. Because the four teams that enter the Memorial Cup, in case you're not too hip with it, are the playoff champions from the WHL, the OHL, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Each league's champion earns a ticket to the Memorial Cup and plays with the fourth team, which is the host city. So hosting the Memorial Cup is a guarantee that you're in the Memorial Cup and gives you a shot at 1 in 4 chance to win it. Now, the CHL doesn't want to see the hosting team not be competitive and get annihilated in the Memorial Cup, embarrassingly. So that is a consideration. And host teams have won. St. John won last year as the host, and they lost in the first round of the Quebec playoffs. So I guess you could say that they were a competitive team, but just came up short in the first round. Were well rested going into the playoffs and played teams that battled through 4 rounds to get there. So anyways, in the interest of looking at what the Kingston Frontenacs could do if Shane Wright is indeed returned to the Canadian Hockey League, to the OHL, let's talk about what their trade package could look like. So the first thing I did when I thought about this was I was like, okay, so what have been some comparable trades in the past where it's not uncommon for Canadian Junior Hockey League teams to trade star players off teams that aren't necessarily a contender, who are about to age out and have just this 1 year left before they turn pro regularly. So Gabe Velarde and Sean Day were traded to the Kingston Frontenacs just a few years ago, so a very relevant transaction for some players that were not relevant. 4 second-round draft picks and 1 third-round pick. Another example would be last year, Arbor Jackeye was traded for 2 seconds and 2 thirds to Hamilton and helped them win the OHL championship. Kingston Frontenacs also traded away Jason Robertson and Jacob Paquette a couple years ago, and they got 2 players, 4 second-round draft picks, 3 third-round draft picks, and 4 other later-round picks for a total of 11. So this is the package that I'm going to be using as my template. You trade 2 players and you get a couple of guys and a whole bunch of draft picks. So in doing this, I decided to take a look at, first of all, if the Frontenacs want to have a contending team, how close are they? What players do they have on their roster right now that they own the rights to that will still be there in 2024 when they're looking to host? And that would be their first round pick from the last draft, Gabriel Frashka. Their first round pick from 2021, Matthew Soto. Last year's second round pick, Jacob Battaglia. Paul Ludwinski, who was just drafted in the second round in the 2022 draft by the Chicago Blackhawks. Their import pick, Linus Hemstrom, a player that they just acquired in trade, Owen Outwater. And of course, they have their own first round pick in 2022, and they own Niagara's second round pick at the end of the season in 2022 as well. So, not bad. You could say it lacks some star power, but, they're very young players. These are 16, 17-year-olds outside of Ludwinski. And Paul Ludwinski has been very good this season. So by the time 2024 rolls around, these players could be very, very strong and making Kingston a competitive team. So let's see what they could add with that. So starting in the West, I looked at a couple of teams that I think not only are having a good season, but I think have the assets, particularly draft picks and young players, that they could put together a package for Shane Wright. So the first team I want to look at is the Flint Firebirds. They're only 6th overall in the West. It's still pretty early, though. And then I think there's a nice connection here between Shane Wright and Brennan Hoffman, who played in the OJHL together. Those two reunited would be an absolute force. So if Kingston wanted to put together a package of something like Shane Wright and maybe a Ben Roger, a good defenseman, Ottawa Senators second round draft pick. This will be his last or second last season in the OHL, so he won't be around for the 2024 season. So Kingston could certainly package those two players, and they would be strong impact players. So let's say that's the outgoing package. What could Kingston get back from Flint? Well, there's a couple of young players that they have that I think Kingston would probably want to target. Colson Petrie, he's a center. He's 17 years old. He was the Flint 2020 fourth round pick, 73rd overall. He's 6', 165. So he's a late birthday, December kid. So he would be eligible for the 2023 NHL draft. So not this, the next draft coming up. In his first rookie season, 21-22, he managed to play in 52 games for Flint, so that's pretty good. He had 23 goals, 21 assists for 44 points, and this was a fourth round pick, so that's phenomenal. He had another 9 points in 16 playoff games. So far out of the gate this year, we're 15 games in. He's got 5 goals, 8 assists, and 13 points. So obviously he's a player that would have a pretty good impact with Kingston, have an increased opportunity as he would probably be their second line center. Another option that they could look at would be a defenseman named Tristan Bertucci, another 17-year-old. He was their 2021 first round pick. He went 7th overall in the OHL priority draft. So that's pretty good draft pedigree. He's a 2023 draft eligible as well. In his rookie season last year, he managed to play a full 62-game season, 1 goal, 11 assists for 12 points, and he also played 11 playoff games, but he didn't score, so he's not an offensive defenseman, obviously. He's got 7 points through 11 games this year, so he's certainly seeing an increased role, and he's trending in the up direction. So, again, a player that would benefit in the long term. So what kind of picks could Flint package together? There is online, there is a handy dandy OHL draft pick database Google sheet that you can look up, and you can see all the teams' draft picks that they have available. So I focused on just every team has their own first round pick, and OHL teams cannot trade their first round picks. They can trade players that were selected in the first round, but they can't trade the draft choice. So there's a lot of second and third round picks in these packages. So Flint in 2022 has 2 third-round picks. They don't have a second. So they'd be looking at trading their Sudbury and London third-round picks. And then in the 2023 draft, they have a second, which belongs to Hamilton, and 2 more thirds, which belong to Flint and Guelph. Flint should be a pretty competitive team this year. They got 6 NHL drafted prospects on their roster. I already mentioned Brennan Othman, Gavin Hayes from Chicago, Amadeus Lombardi, drafted by Detroit just in the last draft, pretty prominent prospect there. Braden Kessler from Toronto, who's having a great season. Dmitry Kuzmin from Winnipeg, defenseman, and their goaltender, Will Cranley, is a St. Louis Blues prospect. So I think that would be a really great fit, and probably my top choice. They're a little thin on draft picks, but they can package together a couple of third round picks and a second. But the real meat of the deal here is the young players that they're getting back. The first place team in the West, the Windsor Spitfires, will certainly be in on this. A couple of young players they could offer would be Ethan Medema, a left winger. He's 17 years old. He was their 2021 first round pick, and he went 4th overall. He's 6'3", 181. So he's only 17, but he's got great size, and this is his second season. He's a 2023 NHL draft eligible. So he played 65 games in his rookie season, scored 14 goals and 24 assists for 38 points, around half a point a game. Windsor had a good run in the playoffs, 25 games, and he had 6 points there. And he's doing great so far this year too. 14 games played, 2 goals, 10 points. So he would be an impact player. And then another option I think that Kingston would target would be defenseman Bronson Ride. Left shot D. He was their second round pick in 2021, going 20th overall. He's got great size. He's 6'5", 200 pounds at 17 years old already. He's a man-sized kid. Also eligible for the 2023 draft. Not an offensive defenseman. 7 points in 37 games in his rookie year. So far this year, He's 14 games in and he's got 3 points. So, a big physical defensive defenseman. You win playoff games with guys like that. Draft picks that Windsor has to offer, they've got a second round pick in 2022, which belongs to Owen Sound. And they have Windsor's third round pick in this coming draft. Next year, they've got a little bit more. They've got Ottawa's second, Kingston's own third round pick, and Sault Ste. Marie's third round pick. So they're in first place. They only have 2 NHL drafted players on the roster, though. Matthew Maggio, Montreal Canadiens, and Daniil Sobolev, another Montreal prospect. So a little thin on NHL talent on their roster, but they're in first place. They got to think that they got a chance to go for it. Adding a player like Shane Wright, Windsor's never been afraid to make those kind of moves before. So I think Windsor is a real candidate. And of course, London Knights will be in on it. They're London. They're only 8th overall in the West right now, but they have 6 NHL drafted prospects. And they a little thin on picks as well, but they have some pretty good young players. I think they would be willing to part with. London doesn't really play their young players that much in favor of the veterans, and adding Ben Roger and Shane Wright would gobble up some ice time from these guys that they not really getting anyways. And then they would get him in Kingston. So Oliver Bonk, son of former Ottawa Senator Radek Bonk, born in Ottawa. He's a right shot D. He's 17 years old, and he was London's 2021 second round pick, going 26th overall, and he'll be eligible for the 2023 NHL draft. Like I said, London doesn't really play their young kids very much, so in his first year, he played 10 games and had 3 assists. So far this year, he's getting the little bit more ice time, though. He's played in 13 games already, and he's got 8 points. So he's become an impact player a relevant player in his second season. So he's a player, I think, at 6'1", 176, with a little bit of offensive upside as well. And then, he's got some NHL bloodlines there that are attractive as well. So that's a player that Kingston might want to target, as well as a center. Luca Testa was London's first round pick in the past 22 OHL draft. They selected him 15th overall. He is a 6', 165, 16-year-old center who will be eligible for the 2024 NHL draft. This is his rookie season. He's got 7 games under his belt with 3 points. He's also off to the U17s for one of the Canadian rosters, but 0 points after 2 games there so far. So he's a player I think might fit into the long-term plans with Kingston. London's got some draft picks they can offer. They got a second in 2022, their own, and they also have 2 third-round picks belonging to Kitchener and Hamilton. In 2023, they've got 2 more third-round picks, which would be North Bay and Sudbury. So like I said, they're a little thin on what they can offer in terms of impact draft picks with only 1 second-round pick. There's like 4 third-round picks in there in the next 2 years. They could sprinkle in a couple other later-round picks. But like I said, they have 6 NHL drafted prospects, including the infamous Logan Mailloux of Montreal Canadiens, Max McHugh, San Jose prospect, Jackson Edwards, a Bruin, Landon Sim, a Blues, Bryce Montgomery from Carolina, and the New York Islanders' Isaiah George. So I could just see Shane Wright being a good fit on a high-profile team like the London Knights. So let's talk about some teams in the East. Kingston might be a little gun-shy to trade Shane Wright within their division, but there are 2 teams that I think can put together pretty enticing, hard-to-refuse packages from the Ottawa 67s or the Peterborough Petes. So let's start with Ottawa. So they have a couple of players who I've identified would be good targets in Henry Muse. He's a right shot defenseman. He was Ottawa's 7th overall pick in the 2022 draft. He's a right shot defenseman. He's 16 years old, so he's eligible for the 2024 draft. He's 6', 174, so he's not a Hulk, but he's not shy. when it comes to size. He's got 7 points through 11 games played this year so far, a goal and 6 assists, and he's also got a goal at the U17s after 2 games. The second player is Christopher Barlas. He's a center, and he was the 2021 first-round pick. They picked him 12th overall. So he's 17, eligible for the NHL draft in 2023. He is a little on the undersized size, 5'10", 181. Last year, he played 48 games with the 67s, 4 goals, 2 assists, so 6 points. So pretty low point totals. And then in 2022-23, this season, 13 games in, he's got 2 points. So, he's a 12th overall pick, so there's some pedigree there, but he's, it'd be easy for Ottawa to part with him, but he's a first round, I should say, pick 12th overall, and Kingston could definitely give him some more ice time and opportunity. The Ottawa 67s have 4 NHL drafted prospects on their roster. Vincent Rohr, Montreal Canadiens pick. Jack Matier, Nashville guy. Another Jack Beck, Calgary Flames. And then, of course, Ottawa's Tyler Boucher, first round pick. So there's 4 NHL draft picks on the roster there. Draft picks that I think the Ottawa 67s have that could offer. They got some decent ones. They got a second round pick in 2022 from Windsor. They have Kingston's second round pick in 2022, as well as Erie's. I just love when you can get your own draft pick back, especially if you're trading away guys to be not as good this year, but better next year. Those draft picks will go up in the draft theoretically. So in 2023, they've got 2 more second round picks, one from Guelph and one from Niagara. So that's 4 second round picks and a third. And a couple of players who are first round picks. So that's a pretty enticing package that the 67s can throw at Kingston. The other option from the East would be the Peterborough Petes. Right now they are 3rd overall. And the 2 players that I targeted that would be desirable from Kingston would be Jack Van Volsen. He is a 16-year-old center. Pete selected him 6th overall in the last draft, 2022. He's 6'1", 172, and so he'll be eligible in 2024 for the NHL draft. His rookie season, he's got 12 games, 5 points so far, 3 goals, 2 assists, and he's got 2 goals at the U17s. Oh, sorry, 0 goals, 0 points at the U17s. My bad, 2 games played, no points. But he's in the tournament. And then a defenseman that Kingston could want, and Peterborough's really loaded with big mobile defensemen. And one that caught my eye when I went to the game this year was a kid called Connor Smith. Connor with a K. He's a left shot defenseman. He's 18 years old. He's 6'6", 209. Doesn't have the draft pedigree that some of these other prospects have that I've talked about. He's a 9th round pick from 2020 by Peterborough, 175th overall. His draft year was last year and he was not selected, so he's a D+1. Last year, 2021 was his first season in the O, and so he didn't play after he was selected. So he played another year in a league below, but he played 52 games in 21-22, had 12 points and 53 penalty minutes. So far out of the gate this year, 12 games in, he's got 3 points. So you know what you're getting with him. He's a big, physical, defensive defenseman, but he has good mobility, so I like that. So Peterborough also has a couple of picks here as well. They got 2 seconds in 2022, one belonging to Barrie, the other from North Bay. And then next year in 2023, they've got their own 3rd round pick and one from Sarnia as well. So they can put together a package of 4 picks, 2 seconds and 2 thirds in 22 and 23. And the Petes are overall 3rd in the East right now. They got 6 prospects on their roster that are NHL drafted. Connor Lockhart from Vancouver, Tucker Robertson, Seattle drafted him as a draft +1 player last year. John Randall Avon, a Philadelphia Flyers guy. Chase Stillman from New Jersey. Big Brian Zanetti, Philadelphia Flyers defenseman. And Artem Guriev, San Jose Sharks, public enemy number 1 here in Kingston. He's sat out a suspension after a very, very illegal to the head hit on Owen Outwater. So those are my top 5 choices for a potential Shane Wright trade here in the OHL. Should Shane Wright be returned to junior, one of these teams would be my top choices. Probably Flint would be the package that I think makes the most sense for both sides. As long as Flint is in a situation where they're contending enough whenever this trade would need to happen. What I'm thinking is Kingston has obviously been working the phone and has a number of scenarios where teams would say, if Shane Wright's returned to junior, this is what we'd be prepared to pay for him if we think we're in a situation where we'll be able to contend for a championship this season. Like I said, the good chance that this trade would happen at or after the World Juniors, assuming that Shane Wright makes it in the NHL to that point where he's still with Seattle, and then loaned out to Canada for the World Juniors, and then he can have an impact at that tournament, and then a trade would already be brokered, and he could be returned to junior with one of the contending teams that I've outlined here. And that would also help Kingston solidify their bid for a Memorial Cup, and everyone would be a winner. Shane Wright would get the reps and the experience he needs to develop. Kingston gets the assets they need to make a bid for the Memorial Cup, and the team that they trade him to gets Shane Wright and a really legit shot at winning a championship this year. So that's pretty much all I got for this episode of the DPR show. I just kind of wanted to dive into this subject a little bit. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have, please feel free to reach out to me. You can follow me on Twitter at PHARLING. That's at Farling. And then the Twitter account for the podcast is DPR_show, Dobber Prospects Radio Show. If you think any of these scenarios are bananas, if you think I missed an obvious team and a even better package or trade return, I would love to hear it. Love conversation and chit chat about the OHL and trades and fantasy hockey, and it's all good. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you on the next episode.